There's only 6 of us over the £1 billion mark. That's ridiculous.
You started as a temp. How on earth did you progress to the incredible success that you've now had?
We grew, 10x in 3 years. Sort of embarked on about 400 meetings around the City of London.
Before you got your first contract?
It gives me goosebumps to think about it. This was never for me about what you could sell the business for. I had this calling. I wanted to be better than the Bank of New York.
Last year, 2025, EY named her as the Entrepreneur of the Year for the UK. But in 2026, it started with a bang, because on New Year's Day, literally day one of the year, she sold a majority stake in her business for over £1 billion. Now, that transaction made her only the 6th woman ever in the UK to found and create a £1 billion business. So this is the new legend on the block. It's a huge welcome to Mia Drennan.
Thank you. Really nice to be here.
Mia, great to see you. Your career is spectacular. You started as a temp. I actually started my career in London as a temp. How on earth did you progress, not just becoming an entrepreneur, but to the incredible success that you've now had?
Yeah, I think that prior to becoming a temp, I went to art college. And prior to that, I wanted to join the RAF, couldn't fly planes. So the art college was the next step. And I realised very quickly that I wasn't going to be able to make a lot of money doing art design. And so my parents packed me off on the train to Liverpool Street with my CV in the end of the 80s. And I started going around to the recruitment agents and I got a job with Office Angels. And my first assignment was actually in Life, London International Financial Futures Exchange. And I was actually in the attic supporting the IT help desk. But obviously I was seeing all the trading underneath what was going on, and that sort of inspired me. And then eventually I found an opportunity at KPMG.
So you didn't have a financial background.
Nope.
You didn't go to university. You were doing arts, but you ended up in a big bank doing really quite a complex financial job.
Yeah.
That in itself is pretty unusual, right?
Yeah, well, to be clear, that I did sort of kind of go to education a little bit later in life. So when I joined KPMG, I'd started in one particular training team for their partners. And as a sort of 20-something, a very curious individual, I then got speaking to a lovely man who I still know today, called David Oxborough, who was in charge of a capital markets team at KPMG. And they wanted to hire a new person into their team, in this audit team, to basically manage all of the non-audit work. And I got the job. And as a result of that, I was in, the audit folks, including Bill Michael, if you remember who Bill Michael is, said, Mia, you should have a degree. You should you should do that. So I started doing my degree in financial services 2 nights a week at London Guildhall, actually, not far from here. Just really to give me that sort of additional education. And it took me 6 years to do that 2 nights a week after work.
That's hard.
But
That's
it helped me.
Hard work.
It's also a big lesson of people, isn't it? You can start learning at any point in your life.
Yeah. And I'm a very curious person, so I'm always learning. But it helped me, and sort of as I moved on from KPMG. I then went to Simmers & Simmers, and that really, I think, probably the start of where I really got curious about debt, institutional debt. And
this is a big law firm, right, in the city.
Again, just round the corner.
Yeah.
For where we are today. But Simmers & Simmers, English law firm, and they were number 1 in debt repackaging. So that was where, the investment banks like Merrill Lynch, UBS and so on were selling these bonds, and they were being repackaged into another debt, which was then sort of traded. A few years into that, what used to happen, Simmons had these amazing cocktail parties, and they'd invite all their clients. And so they used to invite the Citibank trustee team. And I got to know them all. And one day they phoned me up and said, would you like to come and work for us? And that was really how I started on my path towards corporate agency and trust.
Everybody talks about tech, but old-fashioned networking is the key to most things.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So when I joined Citibank in the late 90s, my first deal was working on the financing of the State of France, which was amazing. And then again, twists of fate, things happen. I feel like everything is kind of, you know, meant to be. But after I joined Citibank, so several months after I joined, they actually bought the Morgan Guarantee Trust business from JP Morgan. And there was about 200 people coming into the Citibank Trust business in London. And they said to me, Mia, look, you've only been with us 6 months. I was doing a little bit of sales, a little bit of documentation. It was a brilliant role, like a relationship job. And they said, we want you to go fully into documentation. And I thought, oh, God, I've just left a law firm. I don't want to do documentation without the relationship piece. And so they said, but we're setting up a credit team to look at all of these daylight overdraft limits on these maturity and interest payments, and we'll give you a promotion and you can have credit training. And in the future, you could be like a global RM for Citi. So I thought, that ticks my box. So I then went into the credit team for a while at Citibank. And then at the end of 99, I got a call from Bank of New York, who was setting up their structured finance trustee business. And they said, would you like to come and join us and start us off? And that was really, I guess, the next step to really creating, this business is GLAS.
So how long was your corporate career before you set up your first business?
I started in KPMG in about 91, and I left Bank of New York in 2005.
Because at that point you left and you set up your own business, your first business, not GLAS.
Yeah.
What was going through your head?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll be completely honest with you. So at the end of 2004, my then boss had promised me this big promotion. And at the time, at Bank of New York, to be promoted to a managing director was a big thing.
Yep.
I was running a team of about 30 people, and we were very, very successful, very excited. And he said, what we need to do, he said, is we need to keep it quiet. We're going to find someone to replace you because you're so important for the business. We'll see what happens in next year. So I put my head down, started finding a replacement, all that good stuff. 3 months later, I said to him, where is this role? He said, oh, actually, they're putting an American over from the US, and actually, things have changed. So at that point, I thought, thanks very much. I'm going to look for a new job. And as it was happening, I was going to go look for a new job and go work for a competitor because I had many opportunities to go and do that. And one of the US law firms, a little firm called Emmett Marvin, very niche tri-state law firm in the US, did 90% of Bank of New York's domestic work. We're looking to set up an office in London, and I knew the partners really, really well. And the long and short of it is we had a discussion, and they said, would you like to help us? So I thought, I know everyone in the trustee market, I know all their clients. So I said, yeah. So I set up my first business, Square Mile Connections, in about September 2005.
Which was in recruitment,
Well,
right? So
it wasn't in recruitment.
Right.
Initially, it was actually providing sort of consultancy BD services to this US law firm. And going around, and again, there's a theme here, hustling, knocking on doors around the city of London.
But there's a theme also, Ian, isn't there, which is that you had such great relationships that you were able, there's an interesting psychological point there because a lot of people get passed over for a promotion, right? And, what you did was to say, I'm sorry, enough of that, I'm going. Whereas a lot of people just say, oh, I've passed over for a promotion. But what you then did was you used your network to go and say, look, I've got enough of a network that I can set up my own business.
Yeah.
I think the other thing there, Chris, is people make the mistake of thinking that all entrepreneurs start in their 20s. And I had a look the other day. The average age of a founder is 46. A lot of people, I was 42 when I started. You kind of learn your trade in a corporate life. You meet all the people that you need.
Yeah.
And then you think, now I can go. And that's effectively what you did. You'd built the network first.
Yeah, I was 35 when I left the bank, so 20 years ago. So as I was going around knocking on the doors to sort of sell this American law firm services, all of the people that I knew were like, Mia, we're growing really quickly. Can you help me find people? And I knew there was a massive gap in the market for recruiters at that time that even understood what people did in trust and agency. And people were saying to me, can you help me find a new job? So as a bit of a side hustle, I was actually helping people move from A to B.
So did you sell it, or what happened at the end?
In 2008, actually, because obviously, when the world kind of fell
apart.
over, everything went on hold. And I only ever did perms. I didn't do temporary recruitment or anything like that. And my husband was like, oh, what are we going to do? You know. So I was like, okay, a friend of mine was the chief restructuring officer at Northern Rock. And he said to me, if you find me a risk person, a risk person in 2008, it's like hen's teeth, I've got 40 roles for you. And so anyway, I did miraculously find a risk person. And I did Northern Rock was actually a blessing for me. But after that, I was scarred. And I thought I want to get back into doing deals again.
And is that when you founded GLAS?
Yeah.
Can you explain? A lot of the audience won't understand the detail of some of the financial things. So let's try and break it into layman's language. What does GLAS actually do?
So GLAS is actually effectively like a middleman or woman. So if you think about it, when companies borrow money, they have lenders, and the company would be borrowing money would be called a borrower. And in the middle of that debt is somebody called an agent, and the agent effectively makes all the payments, does the calculations, and also takes the security, holds the security on half the lenders. So it's that facility and security agent or trustee role, which GLAS does. And this was in the past, before I created this business. Number one, no business like this existed. And number two, this was done by the back offices of the banks.
So just to be clear, a lot of these big loans, clearly there are multiple banks. I mean, there could be 7 or 8 banks.
Yes.
Right. So prior to GLAS, one of those banks would act as the sort of agent to hold the money. So pull all the money together into one big lump.
Yeah.
And then that money goes to the company that's
Correct.
doing the borrowing. So there was no one acting as an intermediary at that point in time.
So let's do a practical example, right? So I chair a business that's got 50 to 100 million of debt. Okay, I've got 4 banks, and I have an agent who collects all the money and then distributes it out to the other banks. And if anything goes wrong, they're the ones who are monitoring the covenants and everything. Right now, in my example, it's still a bank. Okay, so I've got 2 UK banks and 2 European ones, but the agent is actually a bank. So how do you break into that market? How do you get them to trust you? And how long did it take you to get somebody to trust you?
Yeah.
Because it's okay having an idea, but you can't just wander into a big bank and say, hey, give it all to me.
Okay.
What happened?
So there's many answers to that question. I think the first thing was I built enough conviction by talking to people I knew who in my sort of professional network that there wasn't actually an opportunity. Secondly, at that moment in time, you didn't need to be regulated, which was helpful. Thirdly, I had an office. I brought in my co-founder, who was a former client of mine. So he was a Magic Circle law firm partner. So again, good credibility together as a team. But then sort of embarked on about 400 meetings around the city of London, right?
How many?
400.
Before you got your first contract?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I'll be honest. If I get 10 and I get rejections, I get grumpy. At 50, I think I might pack in. How do you carry on for 400?
I just knew there was an opportunity, and I was getting, green shoots on the meetings as we were having these conversations, and we had, little bits of opportunities to, like a very small admin roles and things like that. So I knew there was an opportunity, but I thought, well, if it doesn't work out, I've not lost anything. I know I can always get a job.
But the feedback you were getting was
positive.
sort of go for it.
In most cases.
Yeah.
In most cases.
And when did the first client come through?
So,
who was that?
Do you know what? And it gives me goosebumps to think about it. So in June 2012, because it was Olympic year, which I think is kind of symbolic in some ways, the first deal came through from White and Case and Kirkland Ellis, and it was a big company called Klottner Pentaplast, which is a German company. It's actually come around again to us all these years on. And
what did they do?
They were a big German corporate company, and they'd gone through a debt restructuring, and there was going to be a tender and exchange of the debt effectively, and they wanted someone to manage that. And they phoned us up and said, Strategic Value Partners, again, who are still one of my number one clients today, need an agent to do this work. We want to give GLAS a go.
Wow, but I mean, did you have people to?
Well, it's me and Brian, and that was it. We did it ourselves.
So it sounds like you've got an unusual business model in the sense that Some people do well when the economy is growing, and some people do well when it's shrinking. But you cannot win at both sides, don't you?
Yeah.
It sounds like whenever he's borrowing loads of money, great.
Yeah.
Whenever he gets into trouble, great, because you're the one that sorts it out as well.
Exactly.
So that's very unusual.
So that really, and you can imagine, a couple of things happened. I got that deal, and I did a big marketing thing and a big email to all the people that we've been meeting to say we got a deal. So then it was that old moment where people thought, well, we weren't the first.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and I got to say a big shout out to Chris Howard and Jens Sum. They were originally at Linklaters, but they believed in us. And these deals came. I got a Spanish supermarket chain called Dina Sol, Eurotax GLAS. You remember the thing you had to price your cars on, and a whole bunch of other broken companies, which eventually led us to Yellow Pages, which was a year later, which was the crown jewel moment. And that was...
Well, that was your biggest ever deal, was it?
Within that 12-month period. And that's when I kind of knew we were going to make it. And that was 600 lenders of record.
600 banks and debt funds and...
Yeah, exactly.
Just anyone who had a bit of debt.
Globally around the world, £2.5 billion.
And for people who maybe don't remember the Yellow Pages, because there will be people... I mean, this was at one point an enormous business. And unfortunately, with the arrival of the internet, it's disappeared now, right? Effectively,
it's still going in the US, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, for some reason.
So effectively, your task was they got into trouble. They couldn't pay the $2.5 billion back, and suddenly had to sort out that mess, and it was complicated by.
Very complex.
Let's just do that syndication bit. One of the things that I think sometimes people misunderstand when you're borrowing money is, my experience was, once you get past about 15 million, then you tend to need more than one bank. You won't get one bank that says, I'll give you 30 million. Probably two will give you 15 million each. And the bigger the loan gets, the more banks get involved. Then you get to the extreme end, which is that one. You've got $2.5 billion split between 600 people. So it gets incredibly complex.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very interesting transaction. So again, a lot of 600 as well. So you'll often have, we've got this new, well, it's not new now, but at that time, I think the other thing that was lucky for me was the emergence of not only the distressed debt credit funds, but also the private credit funds. So if you start to think in 2012, 13.
Your employees must have grown rapidly, though. How did you handle that?
I honestly, it makes me laugh when I think about it. So for the first 12 months or so, it was a little bit like, big borrow stealing of employees, because we had to persuade people to come and work in this basement, in London Wall.
It was literally a basement.
It was literally a basement. It was a really good address, London Wall Buildings. But we had about 5 people in that early time. So we had temps and what have you. But the first 2 employees that really, they stuck with me all the way through. One of them retired not so long ago, last year, and the other one had a sabbatical, and then she's just come back again and is super excited for be part of our journey as we go now. But yeah, we did, and then we got Haibu, or Yell as it was called, and then we scaled up relatively quickly after that, and we moved out of that basement in September 2014.
And is that the point where you feel, because your business is obviously, it's gone up and up and up, but businesses go up in sort of steps. Was there a point where, I don't know, you had 100 employees or 50 or whatever, and you thought, this is going to be a really big business, even if you don't necessarily think it's going to be worth $1 billion?
Yeah, in the basement, I remember me and my team sitting there going, it'd be nice if we sold this in 10 years' time for 40 million quid. Just should have written that in a piece of paper. So we didn't really think about it. But I think the difference is for me, and I don't know about other entrepreneurs, how they feel about this. This was never for me about the, what you could sell the business for. It was always about, I had this calling because of the fact that I wanted to be better than the Bank of New York.
I love that idea that you sort of create something that makes you lots of money, but no one had thought of it, right? But the second thing is you want to be better than the banks at what you do.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Is that about people or culture, or how do you do that?
So for some bizarre reason, and I do not know this, I'm one of these people that's always about service. So, if you go somewhere and you get really good service, I'm always intrigued about how it comes about. So I've always been focused on, you're only as good as your last situation, you're only as good as your last deal. And that's really part of that sort of creating that gold card service, if you like. So that was really the foundation. We were, answering the phones 24/7, answering emails, responsive, being really helpful, really commercial, really proactive. And I know that sounds it's ridiculous, but banks weren't like that at that moment.
But as you get bigger, it gets harder and harder to keep that consistent culture, for want of a better phrase, right? And particularly when you go international, that gets even harder still. So, how did you handle that whole massive growth phase? Oh, and by the way, how many countries are you in now?
10.
10.
Yeah, 10.
So that's really difficult.
Yes, absolutely. Well, see, the thing is as well, right? I've never seen any of these things as being a challenge. Or I say maybe a challenge, but it's never put me off. Lots of lessons learned. But I think first and foremost is I still participate in inductions of new people. And one of the things we say is we're only ever as good as our last deal, regardless of how that's done. But you're right, we have really scaled. I think what the other part of the culture is we celebrate every deal. So from those first deals that we ever won, we were celebrating. We eventually got a bell. Every time we won a deal, we rang the bell, and then the bell rang all the time. People got the ump with it. So, but the point is, we celebrate.
That's a nice problem to have.
Yep. I've now got a hall of fame internally where every time we get lovely feedback from clients, it goes on that. So anyone joining the company, people want to be on it, right? It's celebrating team wins. It's not always individuals. So we're all about that. And also I've been really focused, and it is challenging to have, effectively a team that all operate as one. So collaboration and communicating one system. Of all the countries.
Sorry, so is that one of the first things you do?
Yeah.
You move them to one system, so it's worldwide,
yeah.
it's all the same.
Exactly. So we've done 4 acquisitions now. And as I say, within, very short shift, we've integrated everybody. So the one we've just done literally at the end of last year.
Well, that's interesting straight away. If you're in 10 countries, 4 of them have been acquisitions, 6 of them have been organic.
3 of them have been acquisitions because I was already in France. So one of them was a bolt-on to the French team.
It must be very different setting it up organically to buying somebody.
Yeah. Oh, so I was always against doing acquisitions. It was never part of any strategy because I've seen so many failures. Well, because basically the first one came about in 2024, which was basically we had about 30 or 40 people in Paris. And we wanted to do a new service, which is called a fiducie, a French security trustee. It's a bit of a academic role, and we were going to build it, but we were so busy because that office was growing at 40%, very busy growing, that the guy was running it was like, I've got no time to really focus on this. And this company called Pristine came along, and the founder was looking to retire, and he really liked us, so that was an easy situation. So that was the first one. And of course, once we'd done that, then other founders came out of the woodwork. So
you find that you're able to, you've got a model that goes. Can we just fast forward, Mia, to the business gets bigger and bigger into the 2020s? You bring in your first private equity fund, I think, which is Levine Like Me.
Yeah.
What was the thinking behind that? Because it's a big thing to give up control or an element of control. And how big was the business at that point?
Yeah, sure. So we, after COVID, so being 50 in COVID, and I thought, I said to my business partner, everything's tied up in this piece of paper, we maybe want to be thinking about what's going to happen. Everyone was thinking, are we going to be around in the future? So part of the reason to go private equity then was to find an investor who, we could take some money off the table, but then go again.
You need some security in your life at some point.
Yeah. And growth equity was the answer. So Levine, founder friendly, really focused on growth. And I come across the lovely Josh Korthman and team.
Was that a minority stake they bought?
Well, 50-50.
50-50.
50-50.
Okay.
So, and we had some shareholders in the business, like staff as well. So we were able to, monetize those people and then roll again. So that was that. And nobody ever tells you you asked me how big we were. We were about 4 or 5 million pound revenue at the time, 45.
Right.
Can we just do 50-50?
Sorry, not revenue, sorry, EBITDA. Sorry, I'm getting confused.
So you're making about £5 million at the time,
Yeah.
but you were growing
About
very
45
fast.
million revenues at that time.
And what difference did bringing a private equity fund make to you, looking back on it?
In reality, it was more about a little bit more professionalisation. So, I think it makes you, really think about what you're going to go after and everything else. But Levine have been a true partner. They've been incredibly supportive. They didn't come, forcing, acquisitions down our throats or anything like that. They were really helpful and supportive. And, our business we grew, 10x in 3 years.
You grew 10 times in 3 years after you met them. Wow. Can we just do the 50-50 bit for a minute? Because I'm always very nervous about 50-50 because there's a danger of paralysis if you fall out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you handle that? Was there ever a point where
you didn't fall out, I think, is the...
Yeah.
Wanted to go that way, you wanted to do that way? You never got to that point?
So, the bottom line is, and I think this is kind of one of the things, look, private equity are there for a reason, right? So you kind of, you find your way to build confidence with them, and the business was really growing incredibly fast. So the numbers were strong. We had some little challenges for various different things, but we always had a grown-up conversation, and I always respect, the team. So it was never about falling out. In my view, it's just about finding a way to work together, and we built and actually they've kept some and rolled into the new deal as well.
I've not met many people who said we grew 10 times in 3 years. So what was the key to that?
Organic growth, predominantly, but also I think really where we'd already planted a lot of those seeds in other locations, they really grew very quickly. So we went from 45 mil to over 100 in that period of time in terms of rev, and then.
Was that winning more market share in the UK, launching
Globally.
New products, or it was new countries that just...
So new countries, we went from sort of about 100, we hired 100 people in the year of COVID, I think. So we've kind of up to 500.
What, in a year when nobody else was hiring, you hired 100 people?
And we opened an office in Germany as well.
And so you've reached the point where you've sold a majority of the business, right, to a private equity fund called Oakley Capital. Yeah. A majority is psychologically different. I mean, you've grown this business from nothing to a very large global business. Mm-hmm. And sounds like you're up for the next stage of the journey. There are a lot of people who sort of not, quite naturally might want to get off the bus at that point. Mm. What was behind that decision to sell the majority, and what's motivating you now, Mia?
So I think, look, 3 years in, we're doing some amazing stuff. We're actually going to really become like a fintech now. So GLAS will become a digital company in the next journey of the next 3 to 5 years.
And what does that mean?
So it basically means, being a fintech. So we've gone from manual processing on spreadsheets to really like straight through processing through, proprietary software, using AI, all that good stuff, and giving, clients.
So you actually developed some IP?
We
right?
are, yeah. So we've already got some amazing portals that we use for our clients, but we're kind of going further. So we're very excited about how that's all playing out. But we thought we'd be a bit further down the line before we had to look for a new investor. But I'm super excited, and I think I saw one of your other podcast ladies, Maxine. She said the same thing. You get out of bed in the morning. This is really about a calling. It's something that drives me to get out of bed. I feel I've got this amazing business. There's so much to do. I mean, so much excitement. What else am I going to do? I mean, I'm really enjoying myself.
But where could the business go from here? I mean, it's already global.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we've got more to do. So we want to be like we want to be number one in the US. That's our biggest opportunity for really, doubling, trebling where we are today, because we're still quite small. We're 60 people in the US, but we could be a lot bigger. And I think the US has been a challenge for various reasons. But we're looking at, South America, we're looking at Canada. We think there's huge opportunities.
That kind of challenge almost becomes like a sense of pride, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It drives you
Yeah.
for no other reason than I fancy the idea of doing it.
And also, look, there's so many different things going on in the world. I mean, banks really are hamstrung by, what should they be spending their time and money on? I mean, technology is a massive issue. Again, banks aren't really, they're not, the things that they're doing, not necessarily focusing on developing their back office systems first, right? So there's a lot of opportunity and disruption at the moment and friction in the financial services world. So there's so much opportunity for a digital company to really maximise
Let's
that.
do it the other way around. What would you tell the young Mia if you were doing it again?
Wow. I had a moment of clarity about 3 months ago when I was in New York, and I've been doing all these pre-marketing meetings with all these very straight private equity men. And I thought, if only I'd have thought about it, I could have bought the company back. So at this point in time, I'm like, a few months from getting down the part that it was too late to do anything about it. But I think I would have told myself, if I was ever going to do it again, hang on to your 51% or whatever it is, because
You've got control.
yeah, and also the private equity cycle is something that is quite challenging because you
What
sort
do
of
you mean they want to sell it within 3 to 5 years?
yeah, so you're always on that hamster wheel, which I think is a challenge. But it depends, what you want. It
But
hasn't
it
done me
doesn't.
any harm.
It doesn't
No.
sound like it. I mean, obviously, money's important to everyone. I think financial security, rather than actually the quantum of money, for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's around the feeling that they're secure, even if they don't necessarily spend the money. But it feels to me like you've got a calling, as you say. You're driven to sort of create a really global powerhouse.
Mission
Yeah.
critical business that didn't exist before. But just on that, the sort of rewards of it, what the nicest thing is that I'm very focused on sharing everything, right? So I was able to really provide all of the people that were with me 3 years ago with meaningful shares in the business.
So they all had options, did they?
Yeah. And so
So you made a lot of people wealthy.
yeah, and I made a lot of people happy, but it feels we're all in it together, right? They're getting up all around the world
Is
doing
this just
things.
the top team, or how
No,
far down
all
is
the way
that?
down.
Everything. Now, that's interesting because we interviewed one of the key guys at Skyscanner, and one of his points, and they're all a point of view, was if you're going to create a small business, only give a small number of people shares. If you want to create a giant one, give them to everybody.
Bottom line is, this is a difference of point. If you come to work for me in Australia, and I probably hardly ever, I see you maybe once a year.
Yeah.
You're getting up every day, doing something in my name, doing it to the best of your, the best you can, delivering on the brand promise that is GLAS. Why shouldn't you share in the success of that?
We haven't talked about the fact that obviously you're female in a city job, which is relatively unusual. We interviewed Sam Smith, who, created FinCap effectively as a broker. She was the only CEO of
It was the first ever female
city
CEO.
stockbroker. Is that ever something that you think about or motivates you, or because it's still relatively unusual, right, to be doing what you're doing?
It is. I mean, it doesn't worry me. I'm very focused on trying to help female entrepreneurs become successful, not just in a city, but I think it's challenging, and there should be more. Like you said, there's only 6 of us over the £1 billion mark, right? That's ridiculous. So, yeah, look, I think it makes you stand out a bit more, and people respect that.
And what would your message be to people who are watching this and thinking, I've got an idea?
Go for it. And I tell you, I remember when I actually first left the bank in New York and I was on a 6-figure salary, people were saying to me, "Well, you're taking a risk," And I said, "Look, I'm still employable. If this doesn't work, I know I'll get another job." And actually, I personally think as an employer, if somebody's actually had entrepreneurial experience and they haven't succeeded, that experience is really valuable. Because they had an idea, they thought outside the box, they know about service and sales and all that good stuff. So you've got nothing to lose, but you've got a lot to gain if you get it
See,
right.
that's very interesting because it was only yesterday I was talking to somebody and saying, when I first set up my business, one of the key chats we had was, what we're going to do the day that somebody leaves, will we let them come back or not? And unanimously, everybody around the table said, we have no right to keep people a prisoner all their life. They want to try things. But also, somebody coming back and saying, the grass isn't greener out there. This place is great. That's a tremendous message. So is that the way that you do it? So it sounds like.
We have a lot of people come back, and it is all about culture. I mean, so people can offer more money, and we have some competitors around the place.
What do you mean by culture?
Well, it's about the community. People come to work to be part of a community. something different, a disruption, a mission. I'll tell you one funny story. I don't know we run out of time, but I went to Manhattan last year to open our new office in New York, and one of the guys came up to me and he said, "I've got to tell you a funny story." I said, "Okay, what's that?" He said, "Well, somebody I know very close to me went to a very large American bank offsite and managed senior management offsite, and they said they put out this thing about their competitors, and they said GLAS is their number one competitor." And I went, "No." But yeah, we're literally globally, we're their number one competitor. And I was like, obviously thought that's hilarious. So I said, "Okay, that's well," I said, "that we've made it. We've absolutely made it." So obviously this kind of spread. And so every time I go anywhere in the company, I tell the teams about this story. Um, so you'll see a lot of people walking around with like number ones. Because we know that they know that we don't know. They probably know now who they are, but that's what is kind of become a thing, a tribal thing internally about. And people just send these pictures to me like this, going number one. it's
Mia,
absolutely brilliant.
it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I mean, what I take away from this, the story of the bell
Yeah.
in the sales team. That story could be in a business selling double glazing, or now I'm not belittling what you do, because you are selling and implementing some of the most complex financial transaction products, right, with a tech platform. But to have that go-getting, we're all in it together culture is what makes you different, and it's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
So, look, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Mia.
And I think one of the things right at the end there that you said, I'm a great believer in, which is a business develops its own history over time. Don't underestimate the power of stories. Stories is what people gives you a common link together, and you'll find that when new starters come, other people will be telling the same stories that you told. Some of the lessons that we're trying to teach people are very complicated. Some of them actually, don't forget the really simple stuff either. It's been an absolute pleasure. And congratulations, by the way. Number 6. Let's see if we can get to 60.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ian, of all the people that we've interviewed, and we've interviewed some amazing people, Mia Drennan has to be possibly the most unusual, 6th woman to create £1 billion business in the UK, but from a background which was really humble into an industry which is pretty, challenging and disruptive. You just wouldn't have predicted she would have achieved that, right?
No, I'm not sure that she would have predicted it either. I think for a long time she didn't know what to do. I mean, the idea that when she finally found something she liked, she then went for 6 years to do night school to get a financial services degree. It just shows you can do education whenever you're ready, but do something that you like.
What I take from her is the sheer drive and stamina. I mean, how many meetings did she do before she won her first client? 400 meetings.
Most of us would have completely banged our head in the wall by then.
So what it really says to you is, and it's a bit like the Matthew Riley interview we did in a previous series, who came from a very humble background, created £2 billion businesses. She really was driven to succeed. It was that sheer drive and relentless stamina that got her where she got to, right?
Yeah, but also it was an event that caused her to set the business up. She'd been in a corporate life doing really well for 14 years, and she was overlooked for promotion. And she was so angry about it, she left and started her own business. And it's often something in your life that happens that prods you into starting.
One of the interesting challenges she's got now, because the business has grown so fast, is how do you, on a global scale, she's in Australia, she's in the States, how do you maintain that culture, which is, very sales-driven, very disruptive, a unique culture? How do you maintain that across multiple different countries?
I think the way that she does it is a massive lesson for all sorts of people. First of all, she has a very simple mission. I used to work at the Bank in New York. I want to be better than that. A bit like Lexus, theirs was beat Benz. They want to be better than Mercedes. But it was interesting that even now, she still gets involved in inducting new starters. They still ring a bell when they win a contract. They still have a hall of fame if somebody says something nice about an employee. But also, they only have one IT system worldwide. So it's the nice cuddly bits, but it's also, we're doing it one way.
And a big lesson, I think, for everyone in business is that, particularly in a people business like financial services, is everyone has share options, pretty much everyone in the company. So everyone is pointing in the same direction. And at the same time, of course, Mia is accessible.
That really reminds me of the Skyscanner interview that we did, where Shane Costafine said, if you want to build a small business, give the top guys options. If you want to build a giant one, give everybody. And her idea of, I can't be in Australia more than once or twice a year, but if they've all got ownership of the company, they'll just try hard. There's a lot to learn from that.
There's a huge amount to learn from Mia. And what's great about Mia is her enthusiasm and enjoyment just are undiminished.
When she says, I want to be number one in the USA.
You wouldn't bet against her.
Absolutely not.